They said men like him didn't feel anything. But that was before a little girl wrapped her arms around his neck. The rain hadn't stopped for hours, tapping against the glass like it had something urgent to say, something no one inside the hospital was ready to hear. And I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could feel so loud and so empty at the same time. My sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor as I moved between rooms, counting breaths, checking monitors. Pretending exhaustion wasn't pulling at my bones like gravity set a little stronger just for me that night. 12 hours into a shift that was supposed to be 8. My coffee long gone cold somewhere I didn't have time to find. And then the doors opened. Not dramatically, not violently, just enough to let in a presence that changed the air, the kind of shift you don't see but you feel, like pressure before a storm, and I didn't look up right away because I'd learned not to react to everything. But everyone else did, conversations dimming, footsteps slowing, even the machines sounding quieter somehow. And when I finally glanced over, he was already there, standing still like he owned the silence, tall, composed, dressed in a way that didn't try to impress, but didn't need to. Dark coat still damp from the rain. Eyes scanning the room not with panic, not with fear, but with control, the kind that doesn't break even when everything else does. And I didn't know his name yet, didn't know what kind of world followed behind him. I just knew he didn't belong here, and somehow that meant he belonged. Everywhere. And then I heard the small voice before I saw her, soft, fragile, like it had been saving its strength for something important. And when I turned, she was already slipping out of the bed, bare feet against the cold tile, her line swaying as if it forgot its purpose. And no one moved fast enough because no one expected her to move at all. But she did, step by step, like she knew exactly where she was going, straight toward him. And for the first time since he walked in, he hesitated. Just a fraction, just enough to prove he wasn't untouchable. And I should have stopped her. I should have said something. But something in my chest told me not to interfere, like this moment didn't belong to rules or protocols or anything we thought we understood. And then she reached him, tiny hands gripping the fabric of his coat, pulling herself closer without asking, without fear, without permission, and she hugged him, just like that, like he was safe, like he was hers, like he was human, and everything stopped, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, completely, like the world had taken a breath and forgotten how to let it go. And I watched his hands, those steady, controlled hands that probably never shook, hover in the air for a second too long, unsure, unprepared, and then slowly, almost carefully, they lowered around her, not tight, not possessive, just there, and something in his expression cracked, not enough for anyone else to notice, not enough to explain, but enough for me to see it, the shift, the fracture, the moment a man who controlled everything realized. He couldn't control this, and I didn't know who he was, didn't know why that little girl trusted him like that. Didn't know what kind of story had just started unfolding in front of me, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: nothing about him would ever be the same again. I should have stepped in, should have said something about protocol or safety or anything that would make sense in a place like that. But I did not move. None of us did, because there was something in the way he held her now. Careful, almost unfamiliar, like he was handling something fragile for the first time in his life. And the little girl did not let go, her small fingers clutching the back of his coat, as if she had already decided he was the one thing in the room she could trust. And I saw his jaw tighten, not in anger, not in control, but in something quieter, something that looked dangerously close to emotion. And when he finally spoke, his voice was lower than I expected, controlled but softer around the edges, asking her if she should be out of bed, not like a command, not like a threat, but like a question he was not used to asking. And she only shook her head against his chest as if that answered everything. And I realized then that he was not the one leading this moment. She was. And that unsettled me more than anything else, because men like him did not follow. They did not hesitate. They did not allow uncertainty to exist in the same space as them. And yet here he was, standing still while a child rewrote the rules around him without even trying. And I finally forced myself to step closer, my voice steady even though my pulse was not, telling her gently that she needed to get back into bed, that her body needed rest, that the foreline was still important even if she felt strong enough to walk. And she turned her head just enough to look at me, her eyes clearer than they had been before, calmer, and then she whispered something so soft I almost missed it, saying she felt safe now. And those 3 words seemed to land harder than anything else that night, because I watched the man holding her react in a way he tried to hide, his shoulders shifting slightly, as if the weight of those words meant more than anything he had carried before. And when he finally looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, I felt it. That same pressure from earlier, sharp and assessing, like he was trying to understand something about me that he had not expected to find. And I held his gaze longer than I should have, not out of defiance, but because something told me that looking away would change the balance in a way I was not ready for. And after a second that stretched too long. He nodded once, a small, controlled movement, and carefully guided the little girl back toward the bed, not letting go until she was settled again, her hand still wrapped loosely around his sleeve as if she trusted him to stay. And I adjusted the line, checked her pulse, doing everything by routine while being completely aware of him standing right beside me, closer than before, quieter than before. And when I asked if he was family, the question came out softer than I intended, because I already knew the answer would not be simple. And he did not respond right away, just watched the girl for a moment longer before saying yes in a tone that sounded less like confirmation and more like a promise he was still learning how to keep. And something in that answer made my chest tighten, not from fear, but from the strange realization that whatever he was outside this room, whatever power followed him through doors and silence, it did not matter here, not to her, not in this moment, and maybe not to me either. And as I finished adjusting the blanket and stepped back, I noticed the way she refused to let his sleeve go, her grip small but certain, and for the first time that night, I understood something I could not explain yet, that this was not just a moment. It was the beginning of something neither of us would be able to walk away from. I thought that would be the end of it, just another strange moment in a long shift that would blur into the others by morning. But I was wrong, because he did not leave, not when visiting hours had long passed, not when the hallway quieted down and the overhead lights dimmed to that late-night glow that made everything feel softer and more distant. He stayed exactly where he was, standing beside her bed, like moving even an inch might break whatever fragile connection had formed between them. And I tried to focus on my work, charting numbers, checking vitals, pretending I was not aware of the way his presence filled the room without effort. But every time I looked up, he was still watching her, not the monitors, not the machines, just her, as if memorizing the way she breathed. And that was when I noticed the smallest detail that changed everything for me. His hand resting on the edge of the bed, not touching her, not quite, just close enough that if she reached out again, he would be there instantly. And I realized this was not about control for him, not in the way I had assumed. This was something else, something quieter and far more dangerous, because it meant he cared, and men like him were not supposed to care, not like that. And I do not know what made me speak again. Maybe it was the silence stretching too long or the way curiosity pressed against my ribs, but I asked her name, softly, keeping my voice steady, and she answered without hesitation this time, Lily. Her voice still small but certain, and when I repeated it back, I saw his reaction out of the corner of my eye, subtle, almost invisible, but there, like hearing her name spoken aloud mattered more than anything else. And then I asked him, not directly but enough, if there was someone I should contact, someone else who needed to know she was safe. And the shift in the air was immediate, not sharp, not aggressive, just colder, more guarded. And for a second I thought he would ignore me entirely, but instead he reached into his coat slowly, pulling out a phone that looked too simple for someone like him. And he stepped away just enough to make a call, his voice low, controlled, speaking in short sentences I could not fully hear, but I caught one word clearly, safe. And that word settled something in me I did not expect, because it meant he was not just here by chance. He was here because she mattered. And when he returned, he did not explain, did not offer details, just resumed his place beside the bed like nothing had changed. But everything had, at least for me, because now I was no longer looking at a stranger who carried power like a shadow. I was looking at a man who stayed, and that difference was not small, not in a world like this. And as the minutes stretched into something softer, quieter, Lily's grip on his sleeve loosened just enough for her to rest her hand against his, her fingers curling instinctively as if they had done it before. And I saw it again, that break in him, That moment where control slipped just slightly. And this time he did not fight it. He let his hand close around hers, not tight, not claiming, just steady, like he was anchoring himself as much as he was anchoring her. And I felt something shift inside me too, something I did not want to name yet, because naming it would make it real, and real things had consequences, especially when they involved someone like him. And yet I could not ignore the quiet truth settling in my chest, that whatever story had started in this room was not ending when my shift did. It was only beginning, and somehow, without meaning to, I was already a part of it. The clock on. The wall crept past 2 in the morning, the kind of hour where everything felt suspended, like the world had quietly agreed to slow down, and I should have been thinking about my shift ending in a few hours, about the drive home, about sleep that never seemed long enough. But instead I found myself watching them again, the way Lily had drifted into a lighter, more peaceful sleep, her breathing steady, her small hand still wrapped around his. And he had not moved, not once, not even when a nurse from another unit stepped in to check a chart, or when a machine beeped softly before settling again. He remained exactly where he was, like leaving was not an option he allowed himself to consider. And I tried to understand it, tried to fit him into something familiar, a category, a label, anything that made sense, but nothing did. Because men with that kind of presence did not stand quietly in hospital rooms for hours without speaking. They did not let children hold on to them like anchors, and they definitely did not look at someone the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing keeping him grounded. And that was when the door opened again, not loudly, just enough to shift the air, and 2 men stepped in, both dressed in dark suits that matched his without trying to, their posture straight, their movements controlled, and they stopped just inside the room as if there was an invisible line they would not cross without permission. And I felt it immediately, the difference between them and him. Because even though they carried the same quiet authority, they deferred to him without a word, waiting, watching, and for a second I thought he might ignore them, might refuse to break whatever moment he was holding on to. But then Lily shifted slightly in her sleep, her grip tightening just enough to remind him she was still there, and only then did he carefully ease his hand free, slow enough not to wake her, placing it gently back on the blanket before stepping away. And the space he left behind felt noticeable, like something important had just been moved, and he turned toward them, his expression changing in an instant, the softness gone, replaced by something sharper, more controlled, the version of him the world probably recognized. And he spoke quietly, too low for me to hear the words, but I saw the way the 2 men nodded immediately, their attention locked on him as if every instruction mattered. And I should have looked away, should have respected the boundary that clearly existed, but I could not, because now I was seeing both sides of him in the same moment. The man who stood still for a child, and the man who commanded a room without raising his voice. And that contrast stayed with me longer than anything else. And when he turned back toward the bed, just for a second, just long enough to make sure she was still sleeping, I caught that flicker again, that break in the armor he wore so well, and it was gone just as quickly as it appeared, replaced by something unreadable. And then he looked at me, not accidentally, not in passing, but directly, like he had been aware of me the entire time. And there was a question in that look, not spoken but clear, something between acknowledgement and warning. And I felt my breath catch for a moment before I forced myself to stay still, to meet his gaze without stepping back. And after a second, he gave a slight nod, not approval, not dismissal, just recognition, like I had crossed into a space I did not fully understand yet. And then he turned away, walking toward the door with the 2 men falling into step behind him, their movements synchronized without effort. And just before he stepped out, he paused, only for a second, glancing back toward Lily one last time. And in that brief moment, I understood something that settled deep in my chest, quiet but undeniable, that whatever world he belonged to, whatever rules shaped him, they did not reach her the same way, and somehow, without meaning to, they were starting to reach me too. I told myself it was over the moment he walked out, that whatever strange gravity had filled the room would fade once the door closed behind him. But it did not. It lingered in the quiet hum of the machines, in the faint indentation his hand had left on the blanket, in the way Lily stirred just slightly, as if she could still feel him there even in her sleep. And I tried to return to routine, to charts and schedules and the steady rhythm that kept everything predictable. But something had shifted, something I could not put back into place no matter how hard I tried. And when Lily woke again, just before 4 in the morning, her eyes opened slower this time, softer, and the first thing she did was look to the side of the bed where he had been standing, her small hand reaching out instinctively before finding nothing. And I felt that moment settle in the air, that quiet realization that something she trusted was no longer there. And I stepped closer, keeping my voice gentle as I told her he had stepped out for a little while, that she was safe, that everything was still okay. And she looked at me for a long second, as if deciding whether to believe me, before nodding once and pulling the blanket closer around her shoulders. And I asked her if she was in pain, if she needed anything at all, and she shook her head again, her fingers twisting slightly in the fabric as if she was thinking about something she could not fully explain. And then she asked a question that caught me off guard, asking if he would come back, and I hesitated for just a fraction of a second, not because I did not know the answer, but because I was not sure I should, and yet something in me answered anyway, telling her yes, that he would, and the certainty in my voice surprised even me, because I realized I believed it. I believed that a man like him, someone who moved through the world like nothing could hold him in place, would come back to a hospital room just because a little girl expected him to. And that thought stayed with me longer than it should have, settling somewhere deeper than logic, and the rest of the shift passed in a blur that felt slower than time itself, every sound sharper, every movement more deliberate, like I was waiting for something without admitting it. And when my replacement finally arrived just after 6, the sky outside beginning to lighten with that pale gray dawn that always felt more like an ending than a beginning, I gave my report with careful precision, making sure every detail was clear. Every instruction followed, because suddenly it mattered more than usual. And when I stepped out into the hallway, I expected the feeling to fade, expected distance to bring clarity, but it did not, because halfway down the corridor, near the exit, I saw them again, the same 2 men from earlier, standing exactly where they had no reason to be, their posture the same, their attention quiet but present, and they did not approach me, did not speak, just acknowledged me with the slightest nod as I passed, like they had been waiting, not for me exactly, but for something connected to me, and I felt it then, that subtle shift from coincidence to something else, something intentional. And as I pushed through the hospital doors into the cool morning air, the rain finally gone, the city waking up around me in slow, steady motion, I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into a single night, a single moment. But deep down, beneath all the logic and routine I depended on, I knew better, because moments like that did not happen without consequence. And as I walked toward my car, the sound of footsteps somewhere behind me made me pause just long enough to realize one simple, undeniable truth. This was not over, not for him, not for her, and not for me. I should have kept walking, should have ignored the sound behind me and gotten into my car like any normal person finishing a long shift. But something in the rhythm of those footsteps made me stop, not out of fear, not exactly, but out of that same quiet awareness that had followed me since the night before. And when I turned, he was already there, standing a few feet away as if he had always been part of the morning. The early light catching the edges of his coat, no longer damp from the rain but still carrying that same presence that made everything around him feel slightly out of focus. And for a second neither of us spoke, the city waking up behind us, distant traffic, a bus pulling to a stop, the ordinary world continuing like nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different, because now he was here, not in a hospital room, not framed by machines and silence, but in my world, or at least close enough to it that the distance no longer felt safe. And I realized then that I did not even know his name, not officially, not in any way that made sense, and yet I knew enough to understand that this was not a coincidence, not a chance encounter extended by circumstance. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried the same control as before, steady, measured, but there was something else there too, something quieter that had not been there when he first walked into that hospital room. He said my name like he had already memorized it, like it mattered. And I felt that land in a way I could not explain, because I had never told him, not directly, not in a way he should have known. And I should have asked how, should have questioned it, but instead I found myself answering him without thinking, my voice steady even as my thoughts shifted, and he thanked me, not in a casual way, not like people usually do in passing, but with intention, like the words carried weight, like they were not given lightly. And I told him I was just doing my job, the same answer I had given countless times before, but this time it sounded different, even to me, because we both knew that was not all it had been, and he did not argue, did not correct me, just watched me for a second longer than necessary, like he was deciding something. And then he said that Lily had asked for me, that she had woken up and the first thing she had done was look for the nurse who told her she was safe, and something in my chest tightened at that, something I did not expect, because I had learned to keep distance, to not let moments follow me home. But this one already had, and I realized then that this conversation was not about gratitude, not really. It was about something else, something that was beginning whether I wanted it to or not. And when he asked if I would be back on shift that night, the question sounded simple, almost ordinary. But there was nothing ordinary about the way he asked it, and I hesitated for just a second before answering, because I understood now that whatever I said would matter, not just to him, but to the path this was starting to take. And when I told him yes, that I would be there, I saw that same subtle shift in him again, that small, controlled reaction he did not let fully surface, and he nodded once, like that was enough, like that confirmed something he had already decided. And then he stepped back, creating space again, not turning away immediately, not breaking eye contact until the last possible second, and as he walked away, disappearing into the quiet movement of the city like he had never been there at all. I stood there longer than I should have, keys still in my hand, heart beating just a little faster than it should have for a simple conversation, and I told myself again that I was overthinking it, that this was just a patient, just a family member, just another moment that would pass. But deep down I knew the truth had already shifted, because this was no longer just about a hospital room, or a little girl, or even him. It was about the way something unseen had started, pulling all of it together, and for the first time, I was not sure I wanted to step away from it. I told myself I would treat it like any other shift, that I would walk back into that hospital with the same routine, the same distance, the same quiet discipline that had carried me through every long night before. But the moment I stepped through those doors again, I knew that was not going to happen, because something had changed, not in the building, not in the staff, but in me, in the way my attention moved without permission, already searching for one room before I had even clocked in. And I caught myself doing it, that small shift in focus that should not have mattered but did. And when I finally reached the hallway, I slowed down just enough to notice what was different, not obvious, not loud, just subtle enough that most people would miss it. The same quiet presence lingering in places where it did not belong. The same men in dark suits positioned like shadows near corners and doorways, not blocking anything, not interfering, just there, and I felt that familiar pressure settle in again, that understanding that whatever world he came from had followed him here, contained but never absent, and I pushed through it, forcing myself to step into Lily's room like nothing about this was unusual. Like I had not spent the entire day thinking about a conversation in a parking lot that should not have meant anything, but somehow did. And when I walked in, she was awake, sitting up a little straighter than before, color back in her face, her eyes lighting up the second she saw me like I had kept a promise just by returning. And before I could even say anything, she smiled, small but certain, and said she knew I would come back. And those words landed in a way I could not explain, because it was not just about me anymore. It was about expectation, about trust, about something forming that did not ask permission first, and I moved closer, checking her vitals, adjusting the blanket, keeping my hands busy while my thoughts tried to settle, and then I felt it before I saw him, that shift in the air, that quiet awareness that someone had entered the room without needing to announce it, and when I turned, he was there again, exactly where he had been before, like time had looped back on itself, the same stillness, the same control, but this time I recognized the difference immediately, because I knew what was underneath it now. I had seen it, and that made it harder to ignore, not easier, and Lily reached for him without hesitation, her hand extending like it was the most natural thing in the world, and he stepped forward just enough to meet her halfway, his movements controlled but no longer hesitant, like he had already made a decision about what this meant. And when his hand closed around hers, it was not careful anymore. It was certain, And I watched that moment with a clarity I did not expect, because now I understood that this was not temporary. This was not something that would fade once she was discharged or once his world called him back. This was something that had already taken root, something that was going to grow whether any of us were ready for it or not. And when he looked at me again, that same steady gaze holding mine just a second longer than necessary, I felt the weight of it differently this time, not as a warning, not as a question, but as something closer to acknowledgement, like we were both aware of the same truth now, that this connection, whatever it was, did not belong to just one of us. It belonged to all three, and that realization settled in my chest with a quiet certainty I could not ignore, because for the first time since all of this started, I was not just reacting to it, I was standing inside it, and there was no clear way out. It did not take long for the outside world to remind us it still existed, because just as the room settled into that quiet rhythm again, the kind that almost made you forget anything beyond those four walls, the door opened, not sharply, not aggressively, but with a purpose that did not belong to routine care, and I saw it immediately in the way the nurse at the front desk had looked earlier, the hushed conversations, the subtle tension threading through the hallway. Something had shifted. Beyond this room, something larger than a single patient or a single night, and I felt it settle into my chest before anyone said a word. That quiet awareness that whatever had started here was beginning to draw attention, and Lily noticed it too, not in the details, not in the way adults did, but in the way children always sense change first, her grip on his hand tightening just slightly, her eyes moving between us as if trying to understand something she could not name yet, and he reacted. Instantly, not with panic, not with urgency, but with that same controlled awareness that defined everything he did, his posture shifting just enough to place himself between her and the door without making it obvious. Like protection was instinct, not decision, and I watched that happen in real time. That transition from presence to purpose, and it changed something in me again, because now I understood that whatever world he came from, it was not separate from this one. It was already here, already touching everything around us whether we acknowledged it or not. And I should have stepped back then, should have created distance, should have reminded myself that this was beyond my role, beyond my responsibility, but instead I stayed exactly where I was, checking her pulse, adjusting the monitor, doing all the things I was trained to do while being completely aware that the situation had shifted into something else entirely. And when the voices outside grew slightly louder, not clear, not defined, just enough to break the stillness, I saw the smallest change in him again, that tightening in his jaw, that focus sharpening into something more precise. And then he looked at me, not casually, not in passing, but directly, and there was something different in that look this time, something that felt less like observation and more like trust, and that unsettled me more than anything else, because trust implied expectation. It implied that I would not step away even if I should, and for a second I considered the distance I could still create if I chose to. But then Lily shifted closer to him, her small voice breaking through the quiet as she asked if everything was okay. And he answered her without hesitation, his tone steady, reassuring, telling her that she was safe, that nothing would happen to her. And I realized then that he was not just saying it for her. He was reinforcing it for himself, like the words mattered in a way he could not fully control. And something inside me made the decision before I had time to think it through, because I stayed. I did not move. I did not step back. I simply nodded slightly, a silent agreement to something that had not been spoken out loud. And when he saw that, really saw it, I caught that same flicker again, that brief, controlled reaction that told me I had just crossed another invisible line, one that would not be easy to step back from. And as the moment stretched, the sounds outside fading again into something less defined, I understood the truth I had been avoiding since the beginning, that this was no longer about one night, or one patient, or even one man. This was about a connection that had formed without permission, without warning, and now demanded something in return, and whether I was ready or not, I was already part of it. The tension in the hallway never fully entered the room, not the way I expected it to, not the way it should have, because somehow the space around Lily remained untouched, like an invisible line had been drawn that nothing outside could cross, and I began to understand that it was not the walls protecting her. It was him, not in a physical sense, not in any way I could measure or explain, but in the way his presence shaped everything around him, bending the atmosphere into something quieter, something controlled, something that refused to break as long as he stood there. And I realized then that safety, real safety, was not always about distance or locked doors. Sometimes it was about the person who chose to stay. And that thought settled deeper than I expected, because it changed how I saw him again, not as a force passing through this place, but as something anchored to it now, something tied to this room in a way that could not be undone easily. And Lily felt it too, her body relaxing just slightly as she leaned closer to him, her small hand still wrapped around his, her breathing steady in a way that told me she believed every word he had said, and I watched that belief take shape, that quiet trust forming without hesitation, and I knew it was not something you could fake, not something you could demand. It had to be given, and she had given it to him completely, and that changed everything, because now he was not just responsible for her safety, he was responsible for that trust, and I saw the weight of it in the way his shoulders held just a little more tension than before, not from pressure, but from understanding. And when he finally spoke again, his voice lower, quieter, directed not just at her, but at me as well, he said that she would be moved soon, that she would not stay here much longer, and the words landed heavier than they should have, because I understood what he meant without needing him to explain it. This place was temporary. This moment was temporary. But what had formed here was not, and I felt that shift inside me again, that subtle pull between staying where I belonged and stepping into something I did not fully understand. And before I could stop myself, I asked if she would be okay, not as a nurse, not as part of my job, but as something else entirely, and he looked at me in that same steady way, holding my gaze long enough to make sure I understood his answer before he even said it. And when he spoke, it was simple, direct, certain. He said she would be more than okay. And for the first time since all of this began, I believed him without question, not because of who he was, but because of what I had seen, the way he stayed, the way he listened, the way he let himself be changed by something as small and as powerful as a child's trust. And Lily shifted again, her voice soft but clear as she looked between us, her fingers tightening around his hand before she reached out with her other hand toward me. And for a second I hesitated, not because I did not want to, but because I knew that taking that step meant something I could not take back. And then I did it anyway, placing my hand in hers, feeling the warmth of her small fingers as she pulled both of us closer together. And she smiled, that same quiet certainty in her expression as she said something so simple it should not have carried weight. But it did. She said that I should come with them, that I should not stay here. And the room went still again, not from tension, not from uncertainty, but from the realization that something had just been said that none of us were prepared to answer. And I looked at him, expecting refusal, expecting distance, expecting the version of him that did not allow things like this to happen. But instead I saw something else, something I had only glimpsed before, now fully present, consideration, not control, not dismissal, but the quiet possibility of a choice. And in that moment I understood the truth that had been building since the beginning, that this was never just about him or her or even me. It was about what happened when three different worlds collided and refused to separate again. And as Lily held on to both of us like it was the most natural thing in the world, I realized something I could not ignore anymore. He could control everything outside this room, every outcome, every decision, every piece of the world he came from. But here, in this moment, the only thing that truly mattered was the choice he was about to make, and somehow, I knew it would change all of us.